The Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord.
When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." So he went with him. And a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had. And she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately, her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this, they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this and told them to give her something to eat. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Today's gospel story is so rich in meaning that there is simply no way we have time to cover everything it is communicating to us. I wish there was, but it would take hours. As I studied today's passage while sifting through the fullness of the reading and deciding on a direction or focus for our time together this morning, I found this quote from Episcopal priest and author Robert Capon to be very helpful. When summarizing the gospel message, Capon has said, "Jesus came to raise the dead. The only qualification for the gift of the gospel is to be dead. You don't have to be smart. You don't have to be wise. You don't have to be anything. You just have to be dead. That's it." So with this quote in mind, as we look at today's gospel reading, I guess the question for each of us this morning is, are we dead or alive? For many of us, our answer might depend on the kind of week we have just experienced. Some of us possibly came here feeling very alive, and we might ask why we are feeling that way. Is it because of a person? Is it because of the love we have received from another? Or is it because of something that maybe happened to us this week? Others might feel sadness. Maybe you are experiencing broken dreams or a sense of alienation. For some, there might be a sense of broken-heartedness that even gives one the feeling of death. This does not necessarily mean one is depressed or one feels sad all the time, but I am sure most of us probably have had times when we can feel and touch a pool of sadness deep within ourselves. I know that my heart has been breaking a little more each and every day as I hear of the hurt, the struggle, and pain in the lives of the most vulnerable among us in our country, in our neighboring countries, and in the world. So if by chance you don't feel particularly alive this morning, that is okay, because I believe you can enter into this gospel lesson by identifying with the 12-year-old girl in today's story. Now, it may sound shocking to think that we can enter this gospel reading by identifying with someone Jesus brings back to life. But remember Capon's words. Jesus came to raise the dead. The only qualification for the gift of the gospel is to be dead. The story begins with this man, a leader in the synagogue, whose name is Jairus. Jairus comes to Jesus because his little daughter is near death, and he begs Jesus to come and heal her. Jesus responds by going with Jairus to his home to heal the girl. However, on the way to the house, Jesus gets interrupted and the girl dies. The interruption is intentional on the part of the gospel writer. There is another story that Mark wants us to hear, and this is the story of an older woman who looks to us to be very much alive, but she is not. Mark tells us that she has suffered for 12 long years with hemorrhaging. This continuous issue of blood has made her an outcast. She is cut off from people, and she cannot go to the synagogue to worship. In her heart, she believes that she is even cut off from God. She is as good as dead in her Jewish community. She is ostracized and considered unclean, untouchable. Yet something propels her through that crowd of people. This woman, I'll have to say, really has guts. She longs to be healed, and Jesus may be her last hope. So from behind, hoping not to be seen, she sneaks a touch of his cloak, and Mark tells us that she is immediately healed. Now, if this were a movie, this would be the point when the camera would zoom in on Jesus as he asks, "Who just touched my clothes?" He then looks around this woman and this woman comes forward, kneels and tells him the whole truth. And this, Mark wants us to know, is God reaching down and saying to this woman and to each and every one of us, "Daughter, son, you took a risk of faith and now you have been made well. You are whole." Yes, Jesus came to raise the dead. While this woman had looked alive, she was as good as dead before she touched Jesus. But now she has been raised to new life, and she has been made well and raised to wholeness. The gospel writer now refocuses our attention on the story of the 12-year-old girl. And it's interesting, we are not given her name. but we do know that her father was very, very important. He was one of the VIPs, one of the bigwigs at the synagogue. He had heard hundreds of sermons and prayed thousands of prayers. He'd heard so much that the church offers. He was familiar with every bit of what the church offered. But none of that matters because today he is face to face with death, the death of his child. And because Jesus had gotten delayed by the woman in the crowd, when they finally reached the house of Jairus, the little girl is dead. Jesus walks in on the preparations for a funeral. People are crying. Trays of food are being brought in. People are looking at this stranger, Jesus, wondering who he is and why he has come. And when Jesus finally speaks, it is a pronouncement. The child is not dead, but sleeping. Sarcastically, the people who gathered laugh him off. He doesn't know what he is talking about. Yet, they do not yet know that they are in the presence of God. And in God's presence, there is no death, only life. Anyway, Jesus bends down and takes the hand of the 12-year-old girl, and he speaks, saying, "Little girl, get up." And to the surprise of those who are present, she gets up, and Jesus tenderly asks them to get her some food. Yes, Jesus came to raise the dead. Presbyterian minister and author and theologian Frederick Buechner, when focusing on this gospel story and Jesus' power to raise the dead, writes, "Little girl, old boy, old boys and girls with high blood pressure and arthritis, and young boys and girls with tattoos and body piercing, you who believe, and you who sometimes believe and sometimes don't believe much of anything, and you who would give almost anything to believe if only you could, you happy ones, and you who can hardly remember what it was like once to be happy, you who know where you're going and how to get there, and you who much of the time aren't sure you're getting anywhere. Get up," he says, all of you. And the power that is in him is the power to give life not just to the dead like the child, but to those who are only partly alive, which is to say to people like you and me, who much of the time live our lives closed to the wild beauty and miracle of things, including the wild beauty and miracle of every day we live and even of ourselves. It is that life-giving power that is at the heart of this shadowy story about Jairus and the daughter he loved, and that I believe is at the heart of all our stories, the power of new life, new hope, new being, that whether we know it or not, I think, keeps us coming to places like this week after week and year after year in search of it. It is the power to get up even when getting up isn't all that easy for us anymore, and to keep getting up and going on and on toward whatever it is, whoever he is, that all our lives long reaches out to take us by the hand. Yes, that God we know in Jesus is always reaching out to take us by the hand and raise us up to new life. So as I reflect upon the broken-heartedness I have been feeling lately, I needed this story. And I also have realized something. Maybe we cannot really know Jesus as the one who raises the dead until we find ourselves truly feeling broken-heartedness and sadness and grief. Maybe we cannot really know Jesus as the one who raises the dead until we let go of all the denial that we would hold on to and let ourselves truly feel the pain so that we can turn that over to God. Maybe we cannot really know Jesus as the one who raises the dead until we find ourselves truly feeling a broken-heartedness that we are unable to fix by ourselves. Just maybe. We have to truly allow ourselves to feel something of death, to truly understand the power of this Jesus who not only heals, but even has power over death itself. I do believe Robert Capon is right on. It is true. Jesus came to raise the dead. The only qualification for the gift of the gospel is to be dead. Amen.